This video is sponsored by Freetoplay, intrinsic virtual advertising. Welcome to the business of games. This is our first video, so we are welcoming Reed Albertsen. Reed's been in the game industry for a fair number of years in marketing. About 10 years. Marketing, production, and other things as well. But Reed's been across the industry at Sega, at Warner Brothers, Game Samba, other places as well. Yeah. He's a dear friend of mine, one of the best guys in production and marketing in the game industry today. So we're going to be talking about monetization methods. That's something I get hit up all the time, especially for people coming up with new game ideas, new concepts. How do we monetize? So I wanted to shed light on the different monetization methods, subscription being one, and just get Reed's thoughts, my thoughts, and we'll throw some stuff up on the board during the video. Right now, I'm working on a title right now that's free to play, and free to play has really hit the country in a strong way, within the last 20 years. But the main monetization methods that I've encountered are subscription, paying monthly, free to play, cash tournaments, and premium.
Yep.
So you have specialized in free to play.
Yeah.
Cool. I know in free to play I've run in to a lot of different issues there with everything from virtual currency types to to how do you handle ads, to how do you balance economies.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts? We'll start with free to play.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on some key things in monetization for free to play titles?
Yeah. So I think that you mentioned a bunch of the different models, and I think that there's a couple of reasons to choose any of those models, and then there's benefits and detriments to each of those. In free to play, I think that the thing that you have to think about is what is the thing that you're generating in your game that the players find a lot of value in. Maybe that's player experience so they can level up their character. Maybe that's gear. Maybe that's anything else. Because really the main thing you're going to want in a free to play game is a really strong game loop, right? Which is some set of actions that results in like an upgrade or progress through the game. And then in a free-to-play monetization model, you can add a monetization step that potentially speeds that up. It gets you there faster or easier, and that's sort of like what free-to-play is built on in terms of like a game system level. So when you think about things like subscription and free-to-play, subscription, as we were talking about earlier, is a little bit more about content, right? Yeah. You think about games like World of Warcraft. Is probably the best example of it. They don't keep coming out with new patches and new expansions. You're not going to pay that whatever it is a month, $15 a month. Yeah. In free to play, generally, your advantage needs to be about systems content in general. If you're in a position where you don't feel like you can make new levels every month, you can't build new characters, you can't add whole new sets of armor or weapons or experiences to your game because those are really expensive generally to develop, then you're going to look for a free-to-play model as an advantage as long as you have the things we were talking about are like game loops that you can go through over and over again where players will see the value in modifying that game loop to be, as I said, faster or whatnot. I think you mentioned in terms of free to play is also advertising, and advertising can be a real pillar of how you monetize your game. I think you mentioned we were talking earlier about the difference between sort of like ads that are just sort of happen automatically, what we kind of call forced. Then there's opt-in ads, which can be incentivized, like, hey, watch this ad and get some in-game currency. And then we've also talked about ads that kind of just happen in the game. So it's not a thing that's like put in front of your face where you can't do gameplay, and neither is it a thing where I can go to it as a part of a feature in the game to like earn currency, something that just sort of happens in the background. And I would say like when you're sort of thinking about that, you sort of have to take that next level of thinking about like, well, what kind of game am I going to have? Am I going to have a game that's going to be really casual? There's a network of games that come to mind called Ketchup. It's actually the name of a
seen that, yeah.
publisher. They make really fun, silly games that you're going to play for like maybe like an hour total max. It's like the water slide game or a game where you're jumping from post to post. And their whole business model is just lots of casual games with a huge audience, right? And one of the things that's true about free-to-play as part of like the business model assumption is that not many people are going to opt in to becoming customers. Many people will be players, but very few people will end up paying you money.
Yeah.
And
really
because
small percentage.
of that, right, you have to model your game economy in a way where that's the expectation, where like really between 2 and, if you're doing really good, 10%, like that's amazing in free to play, of your players become customers. So in this catch-up solution where there's like mass market, you're thinking about things like like forced ads might work because not very many people are going to pay me. They don't play my games a long time. It's really about getting their eyeballs onto content. And that's sort of like the strategic thinking that is applied to how you serve ads. If you've got a game with like really low daily active users, but you have economies that really matter to players, then incentivized ads are great because then they're like, oh, I really need some in-game silver. Yeah, I'll totally watch a couple of ads for that. And then we were talking earlier again about those ads that sort of happen in the background, and that's kind of like a unique and interesting opportunity now with technology where we don't have to like shove it in your face and stop gameplay, and neither do we have to attach it to a system. That's something that can just happen as you're playing the game, and if that's integrated right, I think that there's opportunity for that to be a source of revenue as well.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
And to complement some of the things you were talking about,
Mm-hmm.
when you're in my experience, when you're defining a really good core loop, two things there. A great core loop is going to have a direct effect on your retention. People coming back and playing again and again and again.
Yeah.
And that's where you can then branch out into different monetization methods. But retention has to be there first.
Yeah.
Right. If somebody plays for 5 minutes and never comes back, they're useless.
Yeah.
To generating any kind of revenue.
Yeah.
One great thing I found is if you can provide a certain level of ownership with that core loop, where I get something materially every time, and I feel like I've earned it. The end user, in my experience, is like, oh, I've built up all this stuff. It's now mine, and they'll keep coming back because they feel like that they've built something up. And that can be leveling, it could be items, it could be whatever.
Yeah.
But you've got to bake some ownership in, for the user and really good rewards, no matter what they're doing.
Yeah.
In my experience.
I want to expand on that last point. You said really good rewards, because I think a thing that is really easy to overlook in games is what do those rewards result in? And in a premium experience, which we may get to sort of at the end, there's not as much onus on the game to continually make you feel like you're moving forward, because maybe you bought the game because it's like an experience where you're exploring something, like it's like an open world game where it's really, there's not this like game property that has to be given to you to get this positive experience. It's really about a story or about seeing something new. A requirement for a free-to-play model to work and for a core loop to be strong is that those rewards have an effect that the player can understand, that it's like intuitive enough within the game experience where they're like, oh, he gave me that in-game silver, I used that to get a better gun, I had a better score on that level, because then that free-to-play moment can happen where it's like, you like silver, right? Here's some silver for $1.99, or here's a silver doubler for $10.99. For the rest of your gameplay experience, you get double. These are all just examples, but the player connects that value to what's happening in the game, to the value you're offering them through this mechanic. And if you don't have that as strong in your game, as a free-to-play game, it's going to be really challenging to make that work, because that's really what turns players into customers, is that intuitive understanding of the value of what they're getting.
Yeah, value recognition is really core in free-to-play. One technique that I've used in the past to make that happen is, let's say, there's you can give out missions, early on in a game as part of the first-time user experience.
Yeah.
And if you give an item to somebody where they have to use it as part of a mission that they know they're going to get a nice reward from, they use that item, and then they see the benefit of it. Otherwise, they're not going to go pick up something they have no idea what it is.
Yeah.
So you can start feeding your users items as part of quests. They use it, now they understand the value of it. And then you can say, hey, if you complete this other quest, you'll get these things. So now they know what they're working towards. Yeah. And they start to recognize the value. I found that's really key.
A thing that's happening really interestingly in games right now is that battle passes are really popular. So we saw that was popularized with Fortnite. I play a game called Rocket League, which is a car soccer game that has a
Love it.
battle pass. Now we've seen all the battle royales come out with battle passes. And what's interesting about battle passes as a monetization mechanic is they're that kind of like that midpoint between subscription and free to play. They're definitely mostly in free to play games. I guess Fortnite is a paid game at this point, or is it free to play? I don't remember. But the idea is that like it creates the opportunity for more regular income. If you're like a business person, you're like, how can I count on income coming in? The battle pass is kind of like that, because there's a truth about when you convert someone who's a player to a payer in a free to play system, which is generally their retention is higher. Now you can say that's because they like your game and that's why they're a payer, but also we all know that like if we pay for an experience, we're going to give that a little bit more of an opportunity to land with us than an experience that's free. Like something that we learn in mobile free to play is if you don't grab people in 2 minutes and your game is free, they're gone, because they have no investment. They literally took as long as it took for them to download the app. That's the cost they paid. And if they're at home, that's going to take, what is that now, 60 seconds or something like that? So the battle pass is this great way of also creating retention, which you mentioned is very important earlier. Hey, if I keep playing, I unlock more and more of these rewards in the battle pass. That keeps me coming back. It's almost like a better daily reward system, if that makes sense. But it's that midpoint, because as we pointed out with subscription, there has to be a really strong reason for people to come back. And I remember learning about how people, sort of the mental model for subscriptions for people is they really only want a handful. And the minute that they're offered a new subscription and that's over that handful amount, well, I've got the gym and I've got, World of Warcraft and I've got this magazine, and like the minute they get to like 4 and 5, they don't want more subscriptions. They kind of feel like that's out of hand. So subscriptions have to be a very strong experiential proposition for that to work. Like if you were making chapters, if your game, for instance, was like presented as chapters in a book, every month there was a new chapter, that's like a strong, intuitive model for players to hang on to. But if it's just like a sort of like a normal game and you're like, we'll update the game, like without that explicit promise, subscription models are challenges. And generally, as we've said before, content is expensive and subscription models rely on content. So content-heavy games, really challenging for small teams on non-large budgets. So
subscription is the ongoing content. So game devs, remember this. It's absolutely true. You're going to have to invest a lot into ongoing content if you want to go subscription. However, I have found that if you're able to do that, if you can get a large number of people subscribing, most people tend not to turn it off if it's a low enough price point. If somebody's playing something and it's $2 a month, it's usually not worth their time and hassle to turn it off. So you've got somebody for a long time period who's going to keep paying that subscription. So it's definitely a challenging model. It's one that can work in certain circumstances, but you're going to have ongoing content. So a couple other ones I wanted to, one last thought on free-to-play, because we had mentioned ads. One thing to really be careful of, and with retention and ads, you can create a really terrible experience if you add someone. I don't know what the right term would be, but when there's pop-ups, there's forced ads, there's redirects, there's really terrible offer walls. It can create a bad experience that drives the player away over time, because there's so much content out there. The game industry is very competitive. So if you start, bugging somebody to the point where they can't stand it anymore, they're going to go find something else. So ads can make you money. Be careful with that, though. The sponsor of this video is Freetoplay. Those guys took a new spin on ads, which I really like. They're calling it intrinsic advertising, where they basically bake the ads into the game experience, especially in 3D environments. So it's like having an ad on a billboard and you're still monetizing the end user, but you're not creating a bad experience. I really like that for my title. That's how I ran into the Freetoplay guys, is I was looking for that. And it's really great if you've got a title with a lot of replayability. If your core loop is just fantastic, and the replay, which is kind of what my title does. those ads are going to pay for themselves, pretty quickly in the background.
I will mention about ads too, like, depending on where you come from as a person who's passionate about video games as a developer, there can be a real stigma around advertising. One of the things that I've seen to be true across both of the larger places that I've worked, as you mentioned earlier, is that ads are like a really significant revenue stream for these games. And I think that the forced ads is like definitely the most sort of ham-fisted way to integrate, and it is not it's not the worst idea for really large user base games that you're not going to get a lot of monetization out, whether that's because you don't have game systems that allow that, or you're just not there yet. But I will say I've seen a lot of value come out of advertising when it's optimized well. Looking for a partner who can do that for you, who can get the right kind of inventory in for your audience is really powerful.
Yeah.
And I really want to hit on those incentivized ads again, which is like the more you bake that into the game world, the stronger that becomes. I'll use an example of Heyday, where they frame it like an opportunity. Hey, you got a ticket, you can go to the movie theater. What do you watch in the movie theater? You watch an ad for some currency. That works really well in their game, only because it sort of like gives me a resource I want in the game, but it also kind of fits nicely into the game world. And so that's kind of like, in a weird way, the strategic argument for the intrinsic ads that you were talking about, which is like when it feels like more of an intuitive part of the world, then it becomes less of a thing that in the mind of the consumer drives the value down of the game. Because nothing that drives a value down in the consumer's mind, like being like, oh, I want to play this bocce ball game, whatever, and then boom, the first thing you see is an ad for another game. You're immediately, as a consumer, especially in the modern times, I feel like can perceive that as, okay, this isn't going to be as quite of a high quality experience. I'm not very valued as a customer. And again, like that, there's reasons to turn that on, but I also want to address the stigma, and don't be so afraid that you're not willing to look into some different opportunities for this. I've seen it be a real pillar of monetization for games in the past.
Right on. The last one I wanted to bring up is something I've had some experience with. It's a newer-ish area. It's called cash tournaments. When I worked at GSN, cash tournaments were a big part of their business. It was called World Winner. And basically what cash tournaments were is, think of it just as like entering a golf tournament. You put your entry fee in and you place, right? And depending upon where you place, you could win money, you can win a little, win a lot, or you could just lose your entry fee. It made certain games with a lot of, it just added a whole kind of fun flavor of replayability. And what I found is, and our data told us this, is that people know they're probably going to lose that money, but the longer that they can stretch it out, you put $10 in and you play for a month, because you'll win some, you'll lose some. And then if you can last a month, you feel so proud of yourself. You're like, yeah, I made it last, and you got so much value out of it. And that's a really cool thing. Very few people with cash tournaments are, so massively good that they win the majority of the time and actually make a ton of money. It does happen. But adding cash tournaments into a game as maybe a mode can be really, really fun, especially if there's a competitive aspect to it.
Can I jump on that and say two things? So like the two things that I'd like to say, and we just talked about, requirements in a green light process for games. Like, I know you have done a lot of game evaluation in your career. I've done some. I've been a part of a green light process, but what I've been a part of more is on a team trying to convince people to give me money, whether that's just internally or whether that's externally. And what I can tell you is that, what I want to jump onto in terms of your cash game thing is, I have friends who are starting this business. What's great about cash tournament or cash ideas is that you don't actually have to make a new game for that to be an attractive thing. So I have a friend who's really good at creating things, but not the best like new game maker. But what's a great fit for him was like, I'm going to take games that I know people love and I'm going to add an element to them. And something that I want to tie back into the greenlight process, I'm a little all over the place, but is that like anyone who's good at their job in a greenlight process is going to ask the question, what's the forever game? what's the part of this game that I can play forever? And what you'll see in most modern games, now like Witcher is this like world where like I get 100 people to work on it for $100 million in 3 years, and they can have this rich world with bespoke content.
Yeah.
We're the very few people, very few entities are in that position. So generally you need a forever playable part of your game, and that's usually social. And I feel like what you're saying about these, cash tournament games is that scratches that itch of competition. That scratches that itch of the stakes are high, and so it's exciting. And those are experiences that players are willing to have over and over again with like, even with similar content, right? Like it can't be literally the exact same experience, but I think that when you're talking about monetization, when you're talking about what makes a game business work, regardless of which model you take, it's something that you should be thinking about. It's like, what can my players do as they approach the mid and move into the elder part of their experience that they can kind of just do forever? And I think that both me and you would say, if we saw a game pitch almost kind of any kind, we'd be like, where's the thing that motivates people socially, or that intrinsic thing that they're willing to do over and over and over again without producing lots of new content? Like maybe that's just using the content that exists in new interesting ways or in slightly different ways per experience. So like in a way, like I kind of want to say like, yeah, like that's an interesting monetization thing, but it also hits on like a bigger part of strategy that's important in, strong game making and monetization in general, which is like, what's that forever game? What can I do over and over again? Because that's monetizable, that's retention, that's all the things that matter to a healthy game.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I've been considering with my title is we may not do cash tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you interested in cash tournaments, there is a company out there that helps facilitate that. They're called Skills, Skillz, and they're based actually here in San Francisco. I know a lot of their guys. They're good folks. They provide tools for you to basically bake in tournaments if you want to go through their system. It's pretty good stuff, and I'd encourage folks to check it out if that's something you're interested in. I don't know of anybody else who's doing that. I know World Winner does it, but theirs is an enclosed system. It's just for their titles.
Yeah.
Where if you have your own title, you can use Skills SDK.
Yeah.
A couple other thoughts on that is right now cash tournaments are available in almost all the states. There's a handful that they're not. So you have to geo-IP to make sure that if your game is using something like Skills or another cash tournament thing, that it abides by the state law.
Yeah.
I think there's 5 or 6 states that don't allow it. It also is very interesting in Europe too. There's a group called M2P Games that does cash tournaments in Europe, and those guys have kind of figured out Europe. We figured out the U.S. So, but they're like World Winner. They're in their own bubble. They don't have an external SDK. But the M2P guys are pretty interesting. A group out of Germany. They have a lot of pigs in their games. I don't know why that is. They just have all these cash.
I feel like that should be a big takeaway.
Yeah,
more pigs.
More pigs.
Yes, pigs equal money.
Well, they've got all the sausages and things like that in Germany. I was like, there's a fascination with pigs, but they're really nice guys. I met with their owner several years ago.
Cool.
But yeah, so we'll put some notes up so that everybody can digest a lot of the stuff we just talked about. And hopefully this helps some of you folks who are looking at different monetization models for your titles.
Thanks for having me on, Tony.
Well, thank you, Reed. Cool.
Do it again soon.
Yep. Take care.